On the 4th of July, 1946, in front of a crowd of many thousands of people, a young woman who was just 24 years old was led out to her execution. She was led towards the gallows, which stood incredibly high, and they had purposefully been made in this manner so that people who were around could all have a good view of her final moments. But this wasn't a normal woman of the mid-20th century. The woman who was being taken to her date with the executioner was a callous and calculated woman who had little empathy for people, and she was known as the Beautiful Spectre. Alongside many other female guards of the former Camp of Stutthof, Jenny Barkmann was helped onto a truck in front of a baying ground as the executioner, a former concentration camp prisoner, dressed in their striped pyjama uniform, placed the noose around her neck. But what did this young 24-year-old woman do that sent her to the gallows? On the 30th of May, 1922, Jenny Wanda Barkmann was born in Hamburg, and she had a decent upbringing. She was raised in the household by her father, who worked on the docks, and the family were not the wealthiest, and her mother worked as a housewife. She went to school and had huge dreams to become an actress. But after attending school, she then became a fashion model. In particular, her looks would come back to haunt her, as she would become known as the Beautiful Spectre inside the camp where she worked, her beauty being met by her haunting and disturbing violence and brutality as a concentration camp guard and worker. But she then, as the war was progressing, sought to make some extra money and cash, and she left the photo shoots and that way of life behind her, and then went into a completely different line of work. Inside of the cities where she was working, she noticed an SS advertisement which was offering women to earn more money than they currently were, and they were asked to go and work as part of the SS routine inside of the concentration camps. With this, she also sought career advancement and attended an interview with the SS, and impressed to the point she was offered a short stint of training before she was then sent to Stutthof Concentration Camp. This was a concentration camp inside of Gdansk, and this site was huge, as 110,000 prisoners passed through the barbed wire fences there, and there were 65,000 prisoners who succumbed to their ordeal inside of this camp. There were many SS guards who worked there, and the first woman guard arrived in 1942 to plug gaps in the male workforce, as many were sent to the front lines to fight. But the conditions of the camp were horrendous, and thousands died from diseases such as typhus, which was spread around the camp, as well as starvation, as they were forced to conduct back-breaking work, but the inmates often were given little food to do this. If they refused to work or were sick, then they were either taken to the camp's small firing range, or they were dispatched inside of the gas chamber in the camp, where thousands succumbed to their ordeal at the hands of guards such as Jenny Wanda Barkmann. Now, as soon as she arrived at Stutthof, Jenny Barkmann crafted and developed a notorious reputation for herself, and she became known for her barbarism and her violence. The prisoners saw her regularly battering and beating other inmates, sometimes to death, and she also selected people to go to the gas chambers, where they would then be exterminated. Barkmann was a torturer, and some of the guards were even shocked at her actions, as she was only in her early 20s. They could not fathom how such a young, dainty woman could inflict such horror, and she was compared to other guards such as Irma Grazer for her crimes. She was a fragile and intelligent woman to some, but others knew her as Mad Jenny, and they called her the Beautiful Spectre. She was responsible for many people's deaths, and some of these were killed by her violent actions, and Barkmann also sent many children to their deaths. However, she was not the most intelligent, as when the Second World War was coming to an end, she then tried to escape. This escape attempt was poorly planned. And as the Red Army were close by, she was a wanted woman, and many people wanted her arrested, especially as Stutthof was liberated. Barkmann escaped capture until May of 1945, and she was then actually arrested in the main city of Gdansk, a few miles from the former camp where she worked, and she was trying to board a train out. But some people had helped her to hide. However, what she couldn't escape was the fact that many people had been alerted to her description, and they were looking for her. She was interrogated, and during this she shockingly claimed that she had always treated the inmates with respect and civility. But this was, of course, an absolute complete lie. She stated that she had never killed a prisoner, and that she had even fed starving inmates extra food. But this didn't fool her interrogators. One guard was smitten by her, however, and he even allowed her out of her prison cell for hours. But once he'd heard her true crimes, he never did this again. She was then brought to the Stutthof trials, a huge legal proceedings against a number of former guards of Stutthof camp, as well as those camps or prisoner functionaries who worked at the site. This were prisoners who were given some form of power over other inmates, but at the trial, Jenny Barkmann seemed disinterested and was more concerned about her hair or with flirting with the guards than the fact she was actually facing the death penalty if she was found to be guilty. Her lawyer tried to get her off the charges, claiming she was not of sound mind and that she was insane and crazy, and she was just an evil Nazi. She would laugh in the faces of the brave witnesses and former prisoners who testified against her and told them of her crimes. But the judge had the last laugh for Jenny Wanda Barkmann as she was sentenced to death, and the final words she spoke to the court were, "Life is really a great pleasure, and pleasure, as a rule, does not last very long." She didn't have to wait long for her execution, as on the 4th of July 1946 she was taken to the Biskupia Gorka in Gdansk, and a large hill which today is part of a country park, and it was almost like a carnival on the hill or a huge event. And there were people who were selling food to the crowds, and also people tried to make money from the execution and the crowd that day. There were a number of huge gallows that had been especially made for the execution, and these were so big that people could see from all around. And over 20,000 people were there to witness the executions, and some sources claim many more actually turned up. The former condemned guard of Stutthof were led out on their executions, and Jenny Wanda Barkmann was earmarked as the first of the condemned to be executed due to her age and the fact she was a woman. She was executed on the first gallows, and she was helped up onto the back of a truck where a number of officials stood. There was the executioner, a former guard of Stutthof who would secure the noose around her neck, along with the man appointed to read her death sentence. And when the time came, he read this out and outlined the crimes that she had committed, and the crowd gasped. Jenny Wanda Barkmann was then helped up onto a step, and the executioner had passed the noose over the gallows structure, and then this was secured around her neck. The store was not removed, but when the final checks were made, the truck then moved off slowly forwards, and the noose then snapped tight around her neck, and Jenny Wanda Barkmann was left swinging wildly on the gallows in front of the huge crowd. She was the first to be executed, and within minutes her kicking and fighting stopped, as the life was quite literally choked out of her, and her final moments took place. Jenny Wanda Barkmann was shockingly just 24 years of age when she was executed for her crimes during the Second World War, and she was a woman who chased money and notoriety when she joined the SS to serve as a guard. She loved to wield power over others, and she was someone who was not afraid to beat and strike prisoners, and also send them to the gas chambers for her actions. She was a virulent Nazi, and for her actions she was hanged in front of a huge crowd alongside a number of other female guards who suffered exactly the same fate that day in front of the crowd. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe And again, thank you so much for watching.